Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Out of Spec podcast here in our little corner of the internet where we talk about all things EV. I appreciate you joining us today as we dive into the fascinating world of electric vehicles in China, particularly focusing on the recent Beijing Autoshow. And my guest today is Mark Rainford, automotive content creator with Inside China Auto, here to give us all of the info on the Chinese EV market. Let's plug in. This episode is made possible by the support we get from Fort Collins Kia. If you are in the market for any electric Kia, not only do they never add market adjustments, they will deliver your car to you anywhere in the 48 contiguous states for out-of-spec viewers. More information in the link in the show notes. So China has been a driving force in the global electric vehicle market. They have strong government incentives and support for EV adoption and a rapidly growing domestic market as well. And the Beijing Autoshow is a great place to showcase, of course, the latest developments in the industry, with a multitude of automakers unveiling their newest electric vehicles and EV-related technologies for the world to see. And I'm very grateful to have Mark on today to walk us through what you saw, felt, and thought about this event. So welcome, Mark. How are you doing?
I'm very good. Thank you very much, Francie. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you. I know it's nighttime for you and morning for me, so I appreciate, collaborating with the time difference here.
No worries. I really appreciate you having me on.
Of course. So I'd love to know, how did you get to be an automotive content creator in China with Inside China Auto?
Yeah, so this is my second time in China. I've lived here once before for 3.5 years. This is my second time. And long story short, the second time I came, I was on a family visa. So my wife is Chinese. And I was looking for things I could do with my background in the automotive industry and automotive journalism, things like that. And what I realized when I came back at the tail end of 2021 was that whilst the world had been locked down, or whilst China had been locked down for 2 years, the automotive industry had continued to move. So all that was being sort of done behind closed doors. The Western world wasn't seeing what was going on in China. And I thought there's an opportunity here to combine my knowledge and my passion and actually kind of get those stories outside of China, because you still couldn't get visas in then. So I created my channel as a way of educating people as to what was happening in China and the massive developments that they were making, because if you were in China 10 years ago, it was a very different picture in terms of the car industry.
How interesting. Okay, so a lens into the world today that, personally, I can read about it. I can watch some YouTube videos about it. Sometimes one of our colleagues was not in China, but near China, and kind of got a look into things. But that is a really cool opportunity that you had to say, hey, I can showcase what's going on here. And of course, you got to do that with the Beijing Auto Show. And before maybe we dive into the questions there, I do want to give a brief overview of the Beijing Auto Show that I did my research on, but I'd love for you to edit what I say or add anything that you think is relevant once I kind of go through these things. Yeah, thank you. And so the Beijing Auto Show is one of the largest automotive exhibitions in the world. It attracts a ton of people, really, industry professionals, enthusiasts, and media, of course, which is not uncommon from the auto shows that we have here. But even from your 2.5-hour tour, you can see the long list of automakers that were featured there. And then, of course, China as a whole, in recent years, they've become the world's largest market for electric vehicles, both in terms of producing them and of sales. And according to the China Association of Automobile Manufacturers, sales of new energy vehicles, as they call them, which includes electric and plug-in hybrid vehicles, they reached over 3.2 million units in 2021. And in comparison, last year, 2023, China's new energy vehicle sales were over 9.4 million units, which is up almost 40% year over year. which represents, a significant portion of the country's total vehicle sales, but also the global EV sales as well. And as many of you know, tuning in today, China is big in the battery game as well. And they're the world's largest EV battery exporter. Around 12% of their EV batteries are exported. And as reported by the International Energy Agency, China represents nearly 90% of global installed cathode active material manufacturing capacity, which are key to batteries, EV batteries, and over 97% of anode active material manufacturing capacity today. So they're absolutely huge in the EV and the battery market, EV battery market, which totally makes sense that they go together and would have a really strong market. So Mark, do you have anything that you would want to add there, kind of adding this background to China and EVs?
No, I think that sums it up pretty well, to be honest. The growth is the impressive thing, as you said. And obviously the thing that they're doing now is starting to export a lot of that stuff as well. They're starting to move, out into Europe a bit more. They're doing pretty well in Southeast Asia, kind of South Africa, South America as well. And I think they're really sort of helping to electrify the rest of the world. The only untouched market that they really have at the moment is kind of the US and Canada, because tariffs and things like that mean that at least the good brands don't get in. I know I've seen one of your videos with a Candy K25 or something that was one of the very weird Chinese cars from a while ago. But yeah, if the doors open, there's going to be an avalanche of amazing stuff coming your way. That's all I can say.
Oh my gosh, yeah, I can only imagine if that, and I don't know if it's a win. I feel like it's more of an if at this point because of the global relations aspect that is in here. But I was over in France recently and I got to see some BYD cars in person for the first time. But yeah, I think you make a great point that if those gates open, it's going to totally change the game in terms of the competitive market. And one of their really strong points is that there's a lot of affordable EVs based on, economies of scale. They're making a lot of them. They figured out how to bring down the price. But in the US, we don't really have those really, really, really competitive prices. So that would be quite a change if that were to ever happen.
So yeah, no, I was going to say, one of the things that I get in the comments on my videos from America is how much they want affordable EVs and how much they don't have them at the moment. One of the most popular videos on my channel is the Geely Panda Mini, which is a sub £5,000 car. That's probably about $7,500, something like that. And it's really simple, but it's perfect. And a lot of people think, that's all I need. I want to go to the shops in that car. I can even put a solar panel on the roof to charge it during warm days. They just want to have affordable EVs, and right now they can't get them.
Yeah, affordable and convenient, where EVs shine is like being the daily commuter. And to be able to have one that is that affordable, I mean, that price point is just really unheard of in our market. You might be able to get like an electric bicycle or something like that.
True.
So now with the Beijing Autoshow, I would love for you to help paint a picture for us. I'm sure a lot of our listeners have either watched auto show videos or even been to an auto show. And like I said, you have a 2.5-hour video on your YouTube channel walking through the whole event that I'll make sure to put all the links in the show notes. So there were over 119 launches at the auto show, I think that you said. So that's obviously a long list, but can you highlight for us now some of the most notable EV unveils at the Beijing Auto Show this year?
Yeah, there was quite a few. I would say that the show was maybe a little bit less ambitious than maybe the Shanghai Auto Show last year, because in China the main auto show alternates every year. And Beijing is definitely a smaller location than Shanghai, although next time there's a brand new exhibition hall opening next door, so it's going to be probably a bigger show by then. But I would say that the most notable launches, one of them is the Zeekr Mix. So Zeekr, they just IPO'd at the day of recording this video today on the stock exchange in America, the Nasdaq, I think, or something like that. So they showcased their Mix, which is the first car on their SEAM platform, which is the same platform that the Waymo car, the Zeekr Waymo car, is going to be sat on as well. That is kind of a 5 or 6 seat mini MPV, I would say. I don't know if you really have mini MPVs or minivans so much in the US anymore. But they were quite popular in Europe a while ago, and not so much these days. But that's quite an interesting one because it has it's a B-pillarless car. So it's kind of, you can look all the way straight through with no B-pillar. They use submarine metal to make that B pillar built into the doors. It's got a really small turning circle of less than 5 meters because of the turn angle on the wheels. And it's a rear motor only, although I noticed in the video they actually showcased an engine at the front. I don't think it's going to come with an engine, but I think they were just showing how the platform works. But the Zeekr Mix is a really interesting one because that market hasn't really been touched so much in recent years, with SUVs being as popular as they are.
Interesting. So that's also cool. They got their IPO, which is impressive. And then, I mean, we'll get into kind of the autonomous driving stuff as well later when we get into more of the technology. But okay, that's an interesting unveil. And that one stood out to you mostly because it's kind of a new. I mean, why did it stand out? Why did other unveils stand out in the sea of automakers as well? How can they be impressive when there's so much competition?
Sure, yeah. I mean, the Zeekr was quite impressive. I think because of the style of vehicle it is, because so many other companies are going for SUVs. I mean, you know, in America, the SUV market is huge. It's the same in China. You obviously may have seen that the MPV market or the minivan market is really taking off in China these days, but that's kind of more the big 6 and 7 seat cars. So the X was quite interesting because of the technology that it has in there, because of the use of the SEA platform. Because Zeekr, all of their cars are on SEA. It's a very adjustable platform. They have 3 current versions. You know, cars like the Zeekr 001 sit on that. The Volvo EX30 will sit on that. Polestar 4, for example. So there's quite a few brands now sitting on that platform. And for them to actually launch a public version of the SEAM platform with the Zeekr Mix just means that it's a new model of car out there. It's a new type of car, and it's obviously with the submarine metal they use in the B pillars. It's kind of an innovative way of really expanding the space. I think when you think about electric cars, I mean, I was going back to the Paris Motor Show back in about 2004, for example, and they were talking about electric cars then. I think Cadillac had this platform where you could see through the panel at the front of the car, so that you could see all the way through. It was all steer-by-wire, drive-by-wire, and I think that EVs, as great as they are, they haven't really shown that promise yet in terms of a car that you can almost really use the entire space within the wheelbase, let's say. And the Zeekr Mix, they've managed to use 80% of the space in the car, which is probably they said it's about 10% more than most EVs are currently doing today. So it's a kind of a really smart way of maximizing space within a cabin. And obviously with the Zeekr robo-taxi car, the Waymo car, they're going to need to do that because it's the ideal use of electric cars. You can't do that when you have an engine and all these complicated mechanical parts, let's say. Sure. Okay. So yeah, there was also the BYD Ocean M. That was quite a nice car. That's they didn't really show the inside of that one, but that was kind of the first electric hot hatch, I would say. So I don't know, maybe you don't get Renault in the UK, but cars like the Ford Focus RS and the Renault Megane RS, there's no real electric equivalent, I would say, except for maybe the Ioniq 5N, the new one that's just come out that people are raving about. So BYD have finally entered that kind of space with the Ocean M. As I said, they didn't really talk much about the details of it, but it certainly looks pretty cool. Of course, the Xiaomi SU7 was the huge story. That was an absolutely, I mean, I've never seen a motor show stand packed as much as the Xiaomi SU7 stand was, because Lei Jun was the boss of Xiaomi. He was getting followed around absolutely everywhere in the show. The popularity was insane, and it's an interesting car. It's quite divisive because it's from a side profile very, very similar to a Porsche. They've definitely kind of copied that look, that kind of lithe feel of a sports car that's also a sedan. But it's quite impressive in terms of the tech inside, because Xiaomi, as you know, are a phone maker, and also they make things like air conditioners and air cleaners and battery chargers for your phone, all kinds of stuff. And the thing that they've got with their car is they have this whole ecosystem set up where it's all connected. So you can connect all of your different devices through your car, and you can even plug in Xiaomi tablets in the back. At the same time, it's also compatible with Apple tablets, so you can use iPads in there as well. They're interchangeable. So it's a really smart car in terms of how it is kind of embracing the entire software spectrum, let's say. So that was a really big launch. Honda, surprisingly, came with, I think, 3 brand new electric cars. Well, we've not seen much from the Japanese brands, I would say, in recent years. Toyota obviously keep talking about things like solid-state batteries, but they haven't really delivered on anything. They had a couple of cars that they didn't really go into too much detail about, but Honda had 3 brand new cars, and they're really sort of doubling down in terms of the joint ventures with Chinese car brands. So they manufacture with, I believe, GAC, and I think the other one is Dongfeng, I can't remember. That's so in China you have to have a joint venture. Well, you don't have to anymore. Tesla was the first brand that didn't have to have a joint venture, but Honda did. Well, so they produce with 2 different car companies, and their electric cars look quite interesting. I mean, maybe they won't quite be up to the same scratch as the local brands, but they're using the same platform, so they will be quite good. And in the same mold, Mazda also, who have been struggling in China quite a lot recently, they launched the EZ6, which is essentially a rebodied version of the Chang'an, what do they call it? The Deepal SL03, I think it is. And that is, again, that's a way of not giving up on the China market. So there's many foreign brands who are suffering in China, and they've got a choice now to pull out, some brands have done, or to dig deep. And, Mazda and Honda do seem to be doing so, at least. So yeah, those are some of the big ones. I mean, Denza Z9, another really interesting car, because it's Denza. It's a huge sport shooting brake, a bit like the Zeekr 001. I think it has 3 electric motors, so it will be bloody quick when they put it out there. But again, they didn't release too much information on it. So there's a lot of interesting cars out there, and that's just a handful of them, I would say.
Yeah, a great handful. And I know that I've heard of, Zeekr and BYD and them, being exported out of the country too. And then I would love for you to also tell me a little bit more about this joint venture that was required, because I don't think I know much about that, and I feel like it gives a good picture into the auto market over there.
Sure. So it was always the case that if a foreign car maker wanted to sell their cars in China without particular tariffs kind of bringing them into the country, they had to form a joint venture. So if they wanted to produce cars in China, they had to do that in partnership with a local brand. So, for example, Mercedes-Benz, they build their cars with BAIC, the Beijing Auto brand. I think Honda, as I said, they've got GAC and possibly, I think it's FAW. Volkswagen have FAW and SAIC. So they have to basically partner with a local brand. And the aim of that was that the local brands could, learn from the foreign brands how to make cars. And you can see how well it's worked, because they've learned a lot of the great things from, amazing car brands from Japan and Germany and Europe and so on. And the first time that changed was when Tesla came in. So they were able to make their own factory entirely on their own. And it's now the case that car makers can come in and produce their own factories if they want to, and produce cars entirely on their own. Most of those joint ventures haven't really changed much. BMW, they increased their stake in their joint venture up to 75% with, I believe it might also have been BAIC. No, sorry, it's Brilliance, which was a car brand in China that no longer makes cars, funnily enough. But yeah, so it was always the case that you had to partner with someone else, and it was there to make the local brands better. The local brands did get better, and now in many cases they're better than the ones that they're partnering with, let's say.
Yeah, okay. Really interesting strategy. It makes sense for, having that. If we want to make things strong internally, but also bring in expertise from the outside as well. And I'm wondering, with all these unveils, I know that we've seen a lot of the time they're so very concept forward. They're not exactly tangible. They're not here yet. Do you think, what was kind of the balance between realistic, almost here, definitely going to be here, and more concept-y side of things at the Beijing Auto Show?
I would say that this year it was a lot more production focused. So there were concept cars there. There are some brands who every year will bring one. So GAC, they tend to bring a concept car every year. But yeah, most of the other brands actually went for standard cars that are actually coming. So like you said, the Zeekr Mix is a production car that will come. Xiaomi SU7 production car. I think the only concepts that really stood out, I would say, the Smart #5, which of course is half Chinese now, with a joint venture between Mercedes-Benz and Geely. They brought out the #5 concept, which is their way of taking smart a bit more out of this small brand into a bigger car brand, let's say. Way, so they're a brand, they're a sub brand. Sorry, not Way. Exceed, they're a sub brand under Chery. They brought out an enormous MPV with some very funky looking doors to really open up the side of the car, so you can get into the third row a lot more easily in their minivan. Hongqi brought quite a few concepts as well. Obviously, China's national brand, let's say, the one that the president drives. They had an enormous stand, actually, as they seem to have done the last few years. They brought a few concept cars, including a convertible, which is very rare in China. Convertibles are not big sellers unless you're in kind of the south where the weather is really nice and sunny all year round. So to see them kind of being a bit more adventurous on that side was quite interesting. And it was an electric convertible as well, as Hongqi have been a bit slower to get to the electric side of things, but they're getting there now. But yeah, they also brought out some really big concepts, the kind of cars that you would expect the president to drive around in the future. Currently, I think he has a V8 in his luxury car, but maybe in the future he'll have batteries, which would be a nice way for him to showcase the car industry that he's helped to develop, I suppose. But yeah, the focus is definitely more these days on production cars. Chinese consumers not that interested in production cars, in concept cars. They want to see what they can have today. So yeah, they definitely toned down, I believe, the number of concept cars. But I think that's actually a trend in the market overall. We've seen that less from other car makers as well, because a lot of them don't feel they can justify the cost of a concept car anymore unless it's really showcasing a new design language as such.
Yeah, I think you're right that in general, I mean, I know that we're in our bubble, but concept cars, okay, it's cool to see what you're working with, but what is actually coming to the market? A lot of people want an EV that they can drive today, or a car that they can drive very close to today. So it's cool to see the concepts sometimes, but yeah, we don't love to give them a ton of attention because it's showcasing perhaps potential, but it's really important to see what the reality of it will be like. And I want to ask about, I mean, you kind of mentioned it with the convertible, where that's not a common, maybe style, a car that you see, but are there any other trends or standout strategies or approaches that have been adopted by Chinese automakers in general with the, electrification of our cars? That it's kind of like either that you were like, oh, that's a really cool strategy, would love to see more of that, or that is maybe a common thread throughout these automakers?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few big trends at the moment. Of course, autonomous driving is one, and that's becoming really big in China as well. So obviously, globally, the name is Tesla. But over here in China, we have, of course, Huawei. They are in several different brands now. They have kind of collaborations in building cars and also just pushing their technology into cars. So theirs is probably one of the best, one of the top two in the country. Got Xiaopeng as well. They have one of the top two as well. And then you've got NIO, Li Auto, Zeekr. They're all starting to launch their urban autonomous driving programs now. So that's kind of the next big thing. Everyone's kind of knows that there's the two established ones at the top. FSD is not available in China at the moment, although it may at some point be in the future, based on Elon's trip to China last week, I think it was. So yeah, autonomous driving is a big push. I don't know exactly how many people are using it in downtown areas of big cities, to be totally honest with you. Currently, there's only the Li Autos that have these blue lights that show when they're using it, so you can see for certain that it's on, which is a nice trend, I think. I think we should see more of that. But yeah, it's people just want to have as much tech in their car as possible. So whether that's autonomous tech or whether that is in-car entertainment as well. Chinese drivers spend a lot more time in their cars just doing nothing than other drivers. So we went to the Li Auto mega launch and they told us that their customers on average spend 48 minutes in the car every day, not charging, not in traffic, just sat in the car. And they've got, several 15-inch screens in their car in the front and in the back. They've got all these kind of massage seat functions and the ability to lie all the seats flat and things like that. So in China, the trend is to use the car almost as like a house space, or even like a home away from home, let's say. And really, the brands are just starting to stick more and more tech into the cars. In some cars, you even get like a 32-inch projector that folds down in the back, and there's a little projector beaming, so the second and third row passengers can watch things on a projector. Really just packing entertainment technology in there, and more screens is certainly a popular way to go in China. And I'd say the third thing is charging speeds. Charging speeds are now the next kind of space race, let's say. So the Li Mega was a really quick one. You could add 500 kilometers of range in 11 minutes. And Zika came along with the 001 with the new golden Qilin battery, and that has a higher charge curve, but then dips a little bit below the Li Auto at the end. And so yeah, really now they're all pushing to get the fastest possible batteries in there. Even CATL, the world's biggest battery maker, they had their own stand at the show in the middle of the car halls, and they were launching their new upgraded LFP battery, which is generally generally has a lower range, but they've got up to something like 600 kilometers of range that they can charge in a very short period of time now, which means that those cheaper batteries are now going to be more popular as well in different brands. So yeah, autonomous driving tech, in-car entertainment, and faster charging, definitely the trends in China at the moment.
That's really interesting. I have heard of this, culture aspect. That is, your car is like another room that you hang out in, that you just sit in. And I've heard people, when they get home from work in the US, they might sit in their car, look at their phone for a little bit before going in. But this is taking on a whole new thing of, this is another space where I just spend sitting time in, and to think of all the tech possibilities that go into it. That is pretty wild. Do you see that expanding outside of China? Do you think it really just depends on the culture of the other countries?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because there's so much that's obviously, all these Chinese car brands are now going abroad and they've got all this tech packed into them. And the question that you asked is the interesting one. Are people going to start picking up on the trends from China in Europe and America, and Australia and places like that? Or is it tech that's just going to be completely useless when it gets to Europe? So as I said, right now in China, there's loads of screens in the car. You can get some cars that have 4 or 5 screens, even in the front row, before you even get to the back row. And, people always enjoy screens in the back, especially if you've got kids, because our kids tend to sit in the back and, have some entertainment, watch Peppa Pig or things like that. So the screens in the back are not necessarily going to be a bad thing. I think people will enjoy that. But are they going to start spending lots of time sat in their car? I don't think so. I think brands like NIO, who have not gone over the top with screens, they're probably going to, they seem to think their cars will work better in Europe as they are, with maybe just the single main screen. It's interesting because people, it's a nice thing to have. When you spend a lot of time with these cars, I've been doing reviews of my cars every now and then. I've taken my wife out in the car, and while I've been driving along, she's been watching something on the screen next to me. And in some cars, they actually hide it so the driver can't see it, and in some they don't. But she likes the fact that she can tune into a Chinese TV show or something on the way home, and when our kid gets old enough, she could watch something in the back seat as well. I think it's something that it could be interesting. It will certainly attract people to look at those cars. I think the difference is, in China, people don't necessarily drive for the love of driving. So the cars are generally, in general, fairly anonymous to drive. They're more set up to be kind of soft and not great handling, just comfortable. Whereas in Europe, we drive often for the pleasure of driving. I certainly do. I like to feel the steering wheel and the wheels turning beneath me, and go to a country road just to enjoy the drive. I think in Europe, we still have quite a higher percentage of people who drive for the love of it, not for the tech that they can pack into their car. So yeah, it's debatable whether the trends will catch on in Europe or not, and in America as well.
Very interesting. I can see how that would be a unique to the culture aspect of the EVs, is like, how techy do we get? What kind of entertainment do we have? But on the other hand, you mentioned charging speeds, which is something that I think will be adopted more widely, no matter where the strategy or the technology is coming from. So can we speak a little bit more about, you mentioned charging speeds, of course, we can talk about that, but also China has been aggressively, expanding the charging infrastructure to support the growing number of electric vehicles. But did you see anything in the way of EV charging at the auto show? And can you tell us a little bit more about, what is EV charging like there? And how might it be different from what we know in, Europe or the US?
Sure. I didn't actually see anything from charging at the show itself. There's the main halls where the car brands tend to sit, and then there are some kind of satellite halls that most people generally don't spend that much time in. But in terms of charging in China in general, I think the charging network is pretty good, actually. So State Grid is kind of like the government-owned charging, and they're almost everywhere. They're at every highway stop. They're in a lot of shopping malls as well. So what you'll often find is enormous shopping malls, several of them across these mega cities with millions of people in, and every single one of them has fast chargers underneath, usually from 2 or 3 different brands. And in many more cases now, because in China, the electric car brands, they sell their cars in shopping malls. They don't sell them in retail parks or industrial parks away from the city centre. They sell them right where the people are going to do their normal shopping or going to restaurants and things like that, so that they can see them, in person. And what that means is they often have their own charging stations down in the basement car park of those shopping malls. So, you're starting to see brands like Zeekr, Xpeng, NIO, Li Auto, even Lotus, of course, starting to roll out their own charging networks with much faster chargers now. And I mean, they're absolutely enormous. Many of these brands have got some really big charging networks going on. Li Auto, for example, who I mentioned with the Li Mega, charges 500 kilometers in 11 minutes. They have these super 5C chargers now. They plan to have, I think, 2,000 stalls by the end of the year, and then 5,000 stalls by the end of next year, all over China. Of course, you've got NIO. They have the battery swapping technology. So they have battery swap stations, I believe, way past 2,000 swap stations across the country now in China. So all of the major highway routes from any city to any other city are covered by NIO battery swapping as well. So in China, I think we've got it a lot better than in Europe, and I haven't really been to America recently, but I think we've got it better than you guys as well, because, as I said, everybody's in on it. Everybody's going EV. As I said, the penetration rate is climbing all the time. So, generally there are charging stations available all over the country and all over the cities that you live in. Obviously, there'll be a bit less in the smaller cities, but the major cities certainly are very much covered, and with really good charging speeds too.
Yeah, that sounds pretty nice compared to what we're used to over here. And you did mention NIO earlier. And of course, the DC fast charging infrastructure, that's what we're used to. In terms of battery swapping, we've heard about it, but we haven't really experienced it unless you're Kyle and you've been able to drive a NIO and go through it. Is that technology, I heard, the number of stations, but do you think that's going to become a larger proportion of the strategy? I mean, it's kind of limited to an automaker at this point.
Yeah, I mean, there's developments ongoing with that. So NIO, obviously they're launching their own second brand, so the second brand will be able to use NIO charging stations as well. Although I understand that they are going to launch a separate set of swap stations for those. But they've recently entered a lot of collaborations with local Chinese brands like Chang'an, Geely, GAC, I think was announced today. So they've not said exactly what that means, but it does seem that a lot of the other state-owned car manufacturers and Geely, who are not state-owned, are interested in this swap technology. There are other companies that do it. So there's Rising and IM, who are they're part of SAIC, the Shanghai car company. They have their own swap stations, so you can actually swap batteries in those, but they're not very popular yet, not very big. And there are actually sort of third-party swapping stations. There's a company called Alton, and they do battery swapping for a lot of the taxis in Beijing, for BAIC taxis and things like that. So it's not necessarily limited to NIO. The NIO ones currently are NIO only. But it does seem that there may be the opportunity that other brands are going to get in there as well, and maybe hope to get access to those NIO swap stations. It's still debatable whether it will even be necessary, because NIO swap stations, it will take for example 3 minutes to change your battery. Let's say roughly 5 minutes in total, the whole process. If you get big queues, you end up waiting in a queue for other people, and if you can charge 500 kilometers in 11 minutes, a fast 5C charging station, it's not necessarily a massive advantage to have a car that can swap its battery. So yeah, it's kind of, I'd say I'm on the fence about it personally, about whether it will take off. Certainly with charging speeds increasing all the time, as I said, it might not be necessary. But they do say that the faster you charge a battery, the more damage it does. So it may be that there's a peak point maybe in charging batteries where you can't really get much faster. I don't know. Yeah, NIO have obviously invested a lot of money into it, and it's working out pretty well for them. It is a good thing for them because most of their customers now rent the smaller battery, and if they want to do a longer journey, they can switch and then rent to a bigger battery for the longer journey, which is more useful for them. And that's a really nice use case for it, to be honest. But yeah, whether it will take off for everybody is up for debate. But there is a lot of talk about it.
Yeah, a lot of talk about it. It's an interesting idea. It's kind of a more immediate fix. When you think about the battery health as well, there's a lot of potential advantages, but it's a totally different, setup to how we would charge, quote unquote, charge or get a charged vehicle to keep continuing on our path. So it's cool to see what NIO's doing. And we'll just have to see how wide adopted that could be. And I know that you were saying that it could be applicable for other parts of the market, whether it's like truckers or freight kind of stuff where you're like, okay, I'm on the go. I want to keep that range up and keep going. It would be interesting to see. And then we're speaking about batteries and you mentioned CATL. So I'd love to talk about that, as well, and the presence of them at the auto show, but also battery technologies in general in China that has such a strong battery market outside of EVs and within EVs. Can you give us a bit of a picture of what that looks like? Are there any trends with battery technologies as well?
Yeah, I think essentially it's well, also there's a kind of a trend towards semi-solid state. So the IML6 that was kind of launched at the Beijing Autoshow, but was shown previously, that is now boasting a semi-solid state battery. NIO themselves have a 150 kilowatt hour battery, which is pretty big, certainly the biggest than any Chinese car that I know of. They also claim that is semi-solid state as well. I think there's only certain parts of it that are semi-solid states, not the full thing. Obviously, that is definitely a direction people are wanting to go in because I think semi-solid state batteries can therefore be a bit smaller and lighter and maybe more energy dense than the ones. But I think certainly the trend is packing more energy into them and faster charging. So, as I said, the CATL stand they showcased the LFP battery. I'm not a major expert on battery chemistry as such, but they seem to have eked out another 33% of either storage or charging speed on their new battery. And given that LFP is, as I understand it, cheaper than some of the other battery chemistries, it does mean that better technology is coming to it's becoming more affordable, let's say. So yeah, I mean, previously in other years they showcased kind of what they call a chocolate bar battery that could basically be 3 separate batteries, and you could load up with 1, 2, or 3 depending on what you wanted. I haven't really seen much talk about that recently, so perhaps they've realised that's not totally necessary, or maybe battery swapping will even change the requirements for that. But yeah, the trends are definitely more towards, I would say, semi-solid state and packing in as much range as possible.
Okay, cool. Love to hear about that. I know I get questions a lot about solid state batteries, like where are we there? And I've spoken with automakers that are involved in it, or some kind of research, or with a startup or whatever, and that it's just trying to figure out how to standardize the materials, the processes. So it's cool to hear that there's semi-solid state batteries being presented. I think this is a really cool space that will be a lot of the answers to the woes of EVs right now, which is batteries that are more energy dense, have just higher capacity as well, and that's it, and become less expensive. I think that's a real huge part of of course, why EVs are so expensive, new technology and everything. So have you seen a general trend as well where in terms of pricing or affordability, I know in China it's quite different than the rest of the world?
Yeah, I mean, as I understand it, the prices of the main components in batteries, the raw materials, they've been coming down quite considerably, which does make for more affordable cars. That does mean that they've been able to have this enormous price war that they're having in China at the moment, and it's causing an enormous compression in the market. There's a lot of segments where there are many cars competing for the same space, and they're all just pushing the prices down. You've got BYD, who of course make their own batteries, the Blade battery. They seem to have as much money as they want, and they're just pushing the prices right down. their goal seems to be pushing out the ICE makers. So, the Toyotas, the Volkswagens, that they just want to completely eradicate the ICE market and make it more EV and hybrid, which is what BYD do. But yeah, I think the only way that they've been able to sustain this price war is the fact that the material costs are coming down on batteries in general. I mean, the kind of cars that you can get in China now, the price that you can get them for is unparalleled anywhere else in the world. Of course, when Chinese cars go abroad, they always cost a bit more money. Here, it's just ridiculous prices. I mean, many of the titles on my videos are about the price of the car. You can get amazing cars for $20,000 or $25,000. Full family cars with full 5 seats up to 5 meters long, 40-inch screens in them and things like that. So it's kind of outrageous, really, where the pricing is going. It is almost certainly going to cause some level of consolidation in the market. Right now, China's got about 100 separate brands, many of those clustered within a group. So let's say Chery, they have 8 or 9 different brands of their own, and Geely, of course, have a few brands. It will cause some consolidation. We will lose a few more brands, as we have in recent years. Obviously, Hi-Fi, the kind of super high-end, very funky cars. I'm not sure if you've seen their cars. They are currently on a 6-month production hiatus while they try and get saved by another car brand. But yeah, so we will lose some brands almost certainly as a result of the price war. But the core thing that for the customer is that competition is incredibly intense, which means that they get the best possible choice of cars in China. And many of them even will wait a bit longer because next month you're going to get something else that comes out that's even better than what you had this month. And it makes it really hard, honestly. I'm currently in the market for a car myself. I find it very, very difficult to choose what I would go for. The fact is, most of these car makers are even bringing out heavily revised versions just a year later. So it means that, because the technology is moving on so quickly, that's one of the reasons I would say why used values of EVs tend to be suffering a bit these days, because the technology has moved on so much within 12 months. It's something that gives you pause for thought. If you're buying a car, you think, okay, is it going to be worth anything? There are people I know who bought a Neo, for example, and their car has been superseded last year and then again this year, and they're finding that the value is falling down and they're not so happy about it. That's one of the things that's causing people consternation when they're buying EVs, wondering where the value is going to be in 2 years' time. But it does mean that they get great cars because the competition is just pushing the EV market along further all the time.
That's true. Yeah, depreciation value with EVs as it relates to just better and better technology coming out. And so we'll have to see what happens to used EVs. I think it'll be interesting to just watch with rapid advancement of the technology. You still have a great car. It just might not have all the bells and whistles as your neighbors if they got a more recent one. And something that I want to talk about a little bit, big picture here, is that China's EV market is not only significant, of course, within the country, but across borders. There are also larger implications of what's happening within China in the auto market in the global automotive industry. And I know that, like we kind of talked about, the US does a good bit of work to keep Chinese cars out of the country, but that's not the same for the rest of the world. And we're still watching what these automakers are doing, of course. And so from your perspective, what do you think is the influence of the Chinese automakers and maybe the Asian automakers as well, influencing the broader landscape of electric vehicles worldwide? How big is the influence? What is the influence? What could the impact be?
Well, I hope that the impact is that they force other car makers to step up. I mean, I've worked in car makers before, and I know certainly in Germany, the general feeling is I don't really want to move too much unless I'm absolutely forced to do so. And the Chinese car industry, the EV industry, is developing so quickly that it is absolutely making those car makers have those conversations. Last year in Shanghai, there were so many different, because it was the first time that the country was open for foreigners. You had executives coming over from different car makers, and you could see the fear on their face, and you could hear when they were talking to each other the things that they were concerned about. Like, okay, we need to have this in our car. We need this in our car. This is really good. This is amazing. And you could see them like, how are we going to compete with that? And some of them, for example, I was on BBC World Service last week, and they showed me a clip from the boss of Peugeot, and she was saying, yeah, in like 2 or 3 years' time, our EVs are going to be 40% cheaper than they are now. We're going to be making batteries in Europe, and that's fighting talk. That's good. Europe kind of needs to speed up and do that. The ones that don't have partnerships in China are going to have to speed up. And one of the things that has happened is European car makers have started to make those collaborations. So Volkswagen collaborating with XPeng for their electric cars. You've had Stellantis joining up with Leapmotor for their platforms. Audi have been joining as well. Of course, Volvo already owned by Geely, so they're in there as well. It's going to cause probably some more collaborations. It's going to be a lot of pride swallowing, I would say. And really, it's about getting the message home. You find that a lot of the time, the message is there. People are seeing it, and then they go back to Europe and they say, "Okay, we've got to move. These guys are just banging out cars super quick, and they're bringing out brilliant cars, and they're updating them all the time, and the tech is amazing." And people are going, "Oh yeah, but it can't be that bad. They can't be that good." It's like, no, you have to understand they really are this good. And they're not slowing down because the competition is so fierce here. Even between the car makers, the pace is absolutely breakneck speed, and it's going to cause some seismic shifts, I would say, in the European car market. The only ways they're going to slow it down are going to be through tariffs, maybe keeping Chinese cars out of the country as much as possible, but you can see many of them have already got in. So NIO, Xiaopeng, Voya, Hongqi, they're already in Europe. One other option might be to play the Chinese model and say, okay, right, if you want to come into the US, you've got to partner with Ford, you've got to partner with Chevrolet, you've got to partner with Chrysler. And if you want to build a car here, partner with them. So now we can learn how you guys do it. And they're going to have to learn how to automate like the Chinese do. Some of the Chinese car factories are just incredible. Geely has a factory they call the dark factory, which they don't even turn the lights on in because there are no humans to need the light in the factory. It's all done by artificial intelligence and 5G connected robots that are welding things and checking whether everything's aligned and stuff like that. This is what's happening in China, the automation, the speed of development, they're focusing far more on sort of digital modeling rather than having to waste so much time with kind of clay modeling and things like that. They do still do those things, but they can do faster. They can iterate in kind of, metaverse-like areas with different design studios across the world. They're just full on innovation, and the competition is pushing it. And I think the longer the companies outside of China are kind of pushing them away and going, no, it's not happening, the harder they push, the further behind they're going to get. So, I hope it doesn't end up with kind of the US having some kind of isolated market where it's only the car brands that are there now, and it's maybe just the Koreans and the Japanese and some of the Europeans that are pushing the American automakers. But yeah, if the Chinese come in, they're going to realize very quickly how fast they have to step up their game.
That is such an interesting take that, the more that we push them away and make them kind of go into this, or they at least have this insular competitive up arms race with the EVs, that, we're going to fall behind. I think that there could be a lot more competition to drive further innovation in the North American market for sure. So I think it would be naive not to keep an eye on what's happening in the Chinese market. And I'm sure automakers aren't, turning a blind eye, and hopefully they're feeling the pressure, because as you're describing that, I mean, the technology is out of this world. And as we know, it just develops exponentially. Once you open a new door, it opens like 10 other doors and beyond and beyond. So that's very interesting insight. I really appreciate you bringing that here. And I think whatever the competitive strategies are, whether they're, adding certain technologies or improving the charging speeds or the batteries, it's all really important for us to consider. And it's going to be cool to see, okay, well, this was developed in China, actually, now it's being brought over here, or maybe partnerships or collaborations that will come on in the future. So I think this is all really, really interesting. I appreciate you, Mark, bringing on your perspective to the podcast. I know that we have listeners and audience from all over the world, but to get this insight, especially like you're on the ground, you've been studying it for a while, from you, is very, very valuable. So I really appreciate it.
No worries. Yeah, I mean, the one thing that I can say is, to understand China, you have to be on the ground. You have to be seeing it in real time, because right now, China's industry is very hot. You see there's a lot of kind of China experts coming out of the woodwork now. Many of them not in China or even haven't been to China. There are the guys who are on the ground, and I'm not the only one. There are many of us who've been beating this drum for quite a while now. But honestly, this is why I said you have to see it on the ground. And when so many people come to the Chinese motor shows, whether that's in Shanghai or Beijing, they see it for themselves, and it's like a light bulb goes on. It's like, okay, now I get it. I understand now. They weren't talking lies all the time. It actually makes sense. So yeah, I can only encourage anybody who doubts it to just come and see it for yourself. China's a bit more open now than it was during COVID, at least. And this year we had more Americans at the auto show because they weren't able to get in last year. Yeah, just come and see it for yourself. Try the cars. You can try them in Europe if you can't get to China. Some of them are already there. It's a crazy time to be a kind of a content creator in a market like this, because it's almost impossible to keep up, I would say.
It sounds like it. Yeah, I would love to get an inside look. And with so many things, if you're not there experiencing it and learning from it firsthand, yeah, you might have no idea of truly what's going on. So I think you have a really cool point of view, really cool access. And looking forward, do you have any other projects or things that are exciting you either to cover or work on in the future?
Yeah, so I mean, I also, in my side of things, I cover the commercial vehicle market a little bit as well. So I've looked a little bit at Horizon, which is one of Geely's brands. They have electric vans and electric trucks. I'm off to Yutong next week. They make autonomous buses, autonomous electric buses. So that's another area. You mentioned earlier about commercial vehicles having battery swapping as well. That already exists in China. Geely trucks are able to do battery swapping as well. So they do have these swap stations for trucks. It's really kind of taken up the entire space, the entire mobility space, whether that's moving cargo, moving people autonomously, robo-taxis. Obviously seeing the autonomous driving thing taken up as well. It would be really nice to see if Tesla did open up in China, to see how good their technology works on Chinese roads, because they're very different kettle of fish, as we would say in the UK. They're very different from roads in Europe and America. Often not as organized, and certainly, I mean, they're very nice roads, but they're not as organized, and the people drive any kind of rules that they want sometimes. So having to deal with all the different road users, scooters, pedestrians crossing the road where they like, that makes things much more challenging for autonomous driving here. So yeah, staying on top of that and seeing where that goes is going to be interesting, because right now we don't have the level 3 option as you have in some places in America, where you can literally take hands off completely and pay no attention to the car. Currently, everybody has to at least keep their hand on the steering wheel and be paying attention. They're responsible for their cars. At some point, that domino will finally fall, and some brands will be able to do level 3 autonomous driving in China, and it'll be interesting to see where that goes, because obviously it's a very trust-based system, isn't it? If we're at the point now where I think humans are the thing that are slowing down autonomous cars. Autonomous cars, if everybody was autonomous, they could probably all handle it. But human interaction with that is causing the delay, because they have to deal with how we live, let's say. So, yeah, seeing how that market changes is going to be interesting in the future as well.
So interesting. Yeah, it will be really cool to see, because we've talked about, the full self-driving, the almost autonomous driving of Teslas and the challenges facing it, what it's actually like, whether it's human-like, how that will matter as more autonomous cars are on the road. Maybe they shouldn't be human-like. It's totally a whole new world, and so many implications for, like you're saying, like ride sharing, driving, and commercial use. So also really cool to see. I'm sure we could have a whole nother podcast on what the commercial EV space is like too, because I love the idea of electrifying our fleets, small and large scale and medium scale, of course. So great. And if folks want to, check your stuff out, I know that you have a whole YouTube channel, Inside China Auto. Is there anywhere else they should go to keep up with you, Mark?
I'm also on Twitter, or X, I suppose. So, you'll see me on there quite a bit as well. I am on Instagram, actually, I would say, with Inside China Auto. And I'm hoping to be on TikTok at some point in the future. I don't know if you guys can even use TikTok anymore after the recent decision.
Well,
yeah, I'm hoping to kind of expand onto more platforms like that.
oh, awesome. Yeah, so far, we can still use TikTok. We'll see what happens. Everything's always changing all the time. So thank you again so much for your time and your energy. And I encourage our audience to go check you out, but also ask questions in the comments. What was interesting to y'all about this conversation? Was anything surprising? I know that I actually did learn a good few things from you today, Mark. So thank you very much again for coming onto the podcast. Really appreciate it.
No, I'm glad. Thank you very much for having me on. Really appreciate it. And as I said, if anybody wants to ask questions, as I said, you'll find me on Twitter. Always happy to chat. I always respond to the comments in the videos as well. So, yeah, thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Yes, it's been a pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for plugging in to another episode of the Out of Spec podcast. And we'll see you next time on another one. Have a great rest of your day and have a great night, Mark.
Thank you. Bye.